All right, all right. Welcome back again, sisters and brothers, to another Sister for Sister story time session with your favorite demon slayer, Shia Fire. Again, we are continuing on the, how do I put this? Unmasking the masquerade, the confusion of faith as described in the Bible. Who are the heathen and where are they amongst us? So we must decipher and decode the bloodline. So I will be reading, starting off with the Horites. Um, we are talking about Esau and his wives and how they intermingled with the people. So the Horites were a people mentioned in the Torah, Genesis 14 and 6, 36 and 20, Deuteronomy 2 and 12, inhabiting areas around Mount Seir in Canaan. Um, the name, according to Archibald Sayce, 1915, the Horites have been identified with references in Egyptian inscriptions to Khar, Khar, formerly translated as Harai or Harry, like the Hurrians, which concern a southern region of Canaan. More recent scholarship has associated them with the Hurrians. The rabbinical tradition dating back to Genesis Rabbah 42 and 6, 300 to 500 CE, explains the name of Horites as meaning the free people, from the Semitic root HRR, meaning free. This explanation is less plausible if Horites are identified with Hurrians, who are not a Semitic people. Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, in the Christian Bible. The Horites initially appear in the Torah as being members of a Canaanite coalition who lived near the Sodom and Gomorrah. The coalition rebelled against Chedorlaomer of Elam, who ruled them for 12 years. Chedorlaomer attacked and subdued them in response. Genesis 14, verses 1 through 12. Later, according to Genesis 36, the Horites coexisted and intermarried with the family of Esau, grandson of Abraham through Isaac. Genesis chapter 25, verses 21 through 25. They were eventually brought under the rule of the descendants of Esau, also then known as Edom. The ancestry of Seir the Horite is not specified. Some say Seir lived around the time of Terah, father of Abraham. He is also said to be a descendant of Hor, who is supposed to have lived around the time of Ru and was a descendant of Hivi or Hivi, son of Canaan, son of Ham. They are also linked to the Rephaim, even though they are not explicitly called Rephaim in the biblical text. The pre-Edomite Horite chiefs, descendants of Seir, are listed in the book of Genesis, chapter 36, 20 through 29, and First Chronicles, chapter 1, 38 through 42. Two of these chiefs would appear to have been female, Timnah and Aholabama. Timnah is infamous for being the progenitor of the Amalekites, the arch enemy of the Israelites. Chapter 36, verse 12. The chiefs who descended from Esau are listed in Genesis chapter 36, verses 40 to 43. At some time, certain of these leaders rose to the level of kings over the other chiefs, and the Horite land became known as Edom rather than the land of Seir. One example of these kings is Jobab, son of Zerah, a son of Esau, and his wife Basemath, who is Ishmael's daughter. Genesis chapter 36, verse 35. Another is a Temanite, Husham, Genesis 36, verse 34. A descendant of Esau's son, Teman or Timon, Genesis chapter 36, verses 10 and 11. None of these kings' sons became kings after their fathers died. Apparently, there was no familial royal line whereby sons of these post-Horite kings succeeded to the throne, but rather some other system was in place by which kings were either chosen or won the right to rule. Genesis chapter 36, verses 31 through 39. By the time governance of these people had been consolidated under kings instead of chiefs, Horites are no longer mentioned as such, according to Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 22. The Edomites destroyed the Horites and settled in their land. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Rephaim, who they were associated with. So a Rephite, in the Hebrew Bible as well as non-Jewish ancient texts from the region, the Northwest Semitic term Rephite or Rephaim, the plural word in Hebrew, refers either to a people of greater than average height and stature in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 10 through 11, or departed spirits in the Jewish afterlife, Sheol, as written in the following scriptures: Isaiah chapter 26, verse 14, Psalms 88, chapter 88, verse 11, and Proverbs chapter 9, verse 18. And let's take a look at these verses. So Deuteronomy 2:10, the Emims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites called them Emims. And Isaiah 26:14. Says, they are dead, they shall not live, they are deceased, they shall not rise. Therefore hast thou visited and destroyed them, and made all their memory to perish. Psalm 88. 88 and 11. Shall thy loving kindness be declared in the grave, or thy faithfulness in destruction? Proverbs 9:18. Says that, but he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. And also Isaiah 14:9. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. Now the etymology. There are two main groups of etymological hypotheses explaining the origins of the biblical term Rephaim. The first group proposes that this is a native Hebrew language term which could be derived either from the root. The first root conveys the meaning of healing, as in of the souls, and these souls living in the Jewish afterlife, Sheol, for which they are waiting for their final judgment, dictated by the Jewish God, Elohim. The second root means being weak, powerless, as in those souls within Sheol are weak in the sense that they hold no physical power, as in the living world, and their status is white. All things of the living that gives the living power is thus moot in the land of the dead, Sheol, and its inhabitants are thus again powerless and weak, having to be submissive to the Jewish God, Elohim. The second group of etymological hypotheses treat the word Rephaim as a loan word from some other ancient Semitic language. Among the proposals is the Akkadian Rabu, a prince, but this explanation enjoys rather limited popularity. Far more support has been gained by the hypothesis which derives the Hebrew Rephaim from the Ugaritic Repum, which denotes the semi-deified deceased ancestors who are mentioned in such sources as the so-called Rephaim text, Ketu 1:20 through 22. Despite the inconsistency between these possible meanings and that modern translations clearly distinguish between Rephites as one of the tribes, Book of Genesis, chapter 14, verse 5, chapter 15, verses 18 through 21, Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 2, verses 11 through 20, and Rephaim as the inhabitants of the underworld, Book of Isaiah, chapter 14, 9 through 11, and chapter 26, verses 13 through 15. The same word is used in the original text. The Canaanite people group. In the Hebrew Bible, Raphites or Raphaim can describe an ancient race of giants in Iron Age Israel, or the places where these individuals were thought to have lived. According to Genesis chapter 14, verse 5, King Chedorlaomer and his allies attacked and defeated the Raphites at Ashtaroth Karnaim. Raphites are also mentioned in Genesis 15 and 20, Deuteronomy 2, verses 10 through 21, chapter 3, verse 11, the book of Joshua, chapter 12, verse 4, chapter 13, verse 12, chapter 15, verse 8, chapter 17, verse 15, and chapter 18, verse 16. The books of Samuel, 2 Samuel, chapter 5, 18 through 22, chapter 23 through 13, and the books of Chronicles, First Chronicles, chapter 11, verse 15, chapter 14, verse 9, and chapter 20, verse 4. In the biblical narrative, the Israelites were instructed to exterminate the previous inhabitants of the promised land, Canaan, which include various named peoples, including some unusually tall/large individuals. Several passages in the book of Joshua and also several passages in the book of Joshua and also Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 11 suggest that Og, the king of Bashan, was one of the last survivors of the Rephaim, and that his bed was 9 cubits long in ordinary cubits. An ordinary cubit is the length of a man's forearm according to the New American Standard Bible, or approximately 18 inches or 460 millimeters, which differs from a royal cubit. This makes the bed over 13 feet or 3.96 meters long, even longer if the cubit was based on a giant's forearm. Anak, according to 2 and 11, was a Raphite. The area of Moab at Ar, the region east of the Jordan, before the time of Moses, was also considered the land of the Raphites. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 18 through 21 notes that the Ammonites called the Raphites Zamzummim. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 11, the Moabites referred to them as the Emim, long dead ancestors. Rephaim have also been considered the residents of the netherworld, Sheol in the Hebrew Bible, in more recent scholarship. Possible examples of this usage appear as shades or spirits or dead in various translations of the Bible. See Isaiah 14:9, 26 and 14, 26 and 19, Psalms 88:10, Proverbs 2 and 18, 9 and 18, 21 and 16, Job 26 and 5, and possibly Second Chronicles 16 and 12, where Rephaim may be read as dead ancestors or weakeners, as opposed to Rephaim, doctors. The Hebrew root means heal, and thus the masculine plural nominalized form of this root may indicate that these deceased ancestors could be invoked for ritual purposes that would benefit the living. Various ancient Northwest Semitic texts are also replete with references to terms evidently cognate with Rephaim as the dead or dead kings. Lewis, 1989, undertakes a detailed study of several enigmatic funerary ritual texts from the ancient coastal city of Ugarit. Lewis concludes that the Ugaritic funerary text provides important evidence for understanding the Ugarit's cult of the dead, wherein begins called Rapi Uma, the long dead, and Malakuma, recently dead kings, were invoked in a funeral liturgy presented with food and drink offerings and asked to provide blessings for the reign of the current king. The many references to Rephaim in the Hebrew Bible in context involving Sheol and dead spirits strongly suggest that many ancient Israelites imagined the spirits of the dead as playing an active and important role in securing blessings, healing, or other benefits in the lives of the living. In 2021, a new theory regarding the identity of the Rephaim was published by J. Yagev, which come on now, which suggests that the Rephaim were systematically eradicated from biblical texts as an agenda to eliminate their memory according to the monotheistic belief systems in biblical times. The link between Titan and poltergeist may very well be adduced from the verb stem rapa, which means to sink or relax. Amalek, or Amalek, was a notion described in the Hebrew Bible as a staunch enemy of the Israelites. The name Amalek can refer to the nation's founder, a grandson of Esau, his descendants, the Amalekites, or the territories of Amalek, which they inhabited. The etymology. In some rabbinical interpretations, Amalek is etymologized as Amlak, a people who lick blood, but most specialists regard the origin to be unknown. Amalekites in the Hebrew Bible. According to the Bible, Amalek was the son of Eliphaz, himself the son of Esau, ancestor of the Edomites, and Eliphaz's concubine, Timnah. Timnah was a Horite and sister of Lotan. Amalek is described as the chief of Amalek among the chiefs of the sons of Esau, from which it is surmised that he ruled a clan or territory named after him. The Amalekites were considered to be Amalek's descendants through the genealogy of Esau. In the Oracle of Balaam, Amalek was called the first of the nations. One modern scholar believes this attests to Amalek's high antiquity, while traditional commentator Rashi states he came before all of them to make war with Israel. First century Roman Jewish scholar and historian Flavius Josephus refers to Amalek as a bastard in a derogatory sense. According to the Bible, the Amalekites inhabited the Negev. They appear to have lived a nomadic or semi nomadic lifestyle along the fringes of southern Canaan's agricultural zone. This is probably based on the association of this tribal group with the steppe region of ancient Israel and the area of Kadesh, Genesis chapter 14, verse 7. It has been suggested by Moshe Kashabi that the Amalek, city of Amalek, referred to at 1 Samuel 15, verse 5, may be identified with the site of Kerbet el Meshash, Tel Mesos, on the periphery of the Wadi Beersheba, some 12 kilometers east of the city of Beersheba itself. An earlier hypothesis held that the Tel Mesos site was an Israelite settlement mentioned in the Bible as Hormah. It has been further argued that if the identification of the settlement at Tel Mesos with the Amalekites is correct, then behind the biblical narrative of Saul's campaigns against this central Amalekite station of the southern network of metal transportation and trade, there may have been a strategic desire to wrest control of copper production, a metal of key importance in the early Israelite period, and it is argued in its early theology and ritual. As a people, the Amalekites were identified as a recurrent enemy of the Israelites. This role appears in several stories. In Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 16, Amalek makes war against Israel in the wilderness. Joshua is ordered by Moses to lead Israel in battle, and Moses watches from a hillside. When Moses' hand is raised, Israel prevails, but when it is lowered, Israel falters. So he keeps his hand raised through the entire battle, even having assistants hold him up, so that the battle will go to Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 19, the Israelites are specifically commanded to blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven once they have taken possession of the promised land in retribution for what Amalek did to them on the way as they were coming out of Egypt. Earlier in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 16, and Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 16 through 18, they are commanded to utterly destroy all the inhabitants of the idolatrous cities in the promised land and their livestock. Scripture purports that King Saul ultimately loses favor with Yahweh for failing to kill King Agag and the best livestock of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15 in defiance of these commandments. In 1 Samuel chapter 15 verses 1 through 9, Samuel identifies Amalek as the enemy of Israelites, saying, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt." God then commands Saul to destroy the Amalekites. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 33, Samuel identifies King Agag of Amalek as an enemy and killer, saying, "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women." According to 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 to 2, the Amalekites invaded the Negev and Ziklag in the Judean Philistine border area towards the end of the reign of King Saul, burning Ziklag and taking its citizens away into captivity. The future King David led a successful mission against the Amalekites to recover all that the Amalekites had carried away. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 5 through 10, an Amalekite tells David that he found Saul leaning on his spear after the battle of Gilboa. The Amalekite claimed he euthanized Saul at Saul's request and removed his crown. David gives order to his men to kill the Amalekite for killing the anointed king, using his own testimony as reference. Alternative theories of origins. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 7, the field of Amalekites is mentioned, though the person Amalek had not yet been born. Some commentators explain this as a reference to the territory which was later on inhabited by the Amalekites. C. Knight elaborates this concept by making a comparison. One might say Caesar went into France, though Gaul only later became known as France. Alternatively, during the Islamic Golden Age, certain Arabic writings claimed that the Amalekites existed long before Abraham. Some Muslim historians claim that the Amalekites who fought Joshua were descendants of the inhabitants of North Africa. Ibn Arabsha purported that Amalek was a descendant of Ham, son of Noah. It is, however, possible that the name Amalek may have been given to two different nations. The Arabians mention Imlek, Amalek, or Amaleka among the Aborigines of Arabia, the remains of which were mingled with the descendants of Qatan or Joktan and Adnan and became most Arabs or mock Arabs, that is, Arabians mixed with foreigners. By the 19th century, there was strong support by Western theologians for the idea that the nation of Amalek could have flourished before the time of Abraham. Matthew George Easton advocated that the Amalekites were not descendants of Amalek by taking a literal approach to Genesis 14 and 7. However, the modern biblical scholar David Friedman uses textual analysis to glean that the use of Amalekite in Genesis 14 and 7 is actually an anachronism. And in the early 19th century, Richard Watson enumerated several speculative reasons for having a more ancient Amalek than Abraham. In the exegesis of Numbers chapter 24, verse 20, concerning Balaam's utterance, Amalek was the first one of the nations, but his end afterward will be even his perishing. Richard Watson attempts to associate this passage to the first one of the nations that developed post flood. According to Samuel Cox, the Amalekites were the first in their hostility towards the Israelites. Historicity. Although Egyptian and Assyrian monumental inscriptions and records of the period survive, which list various tribes and peoples of the area, no reference has ever been found to Amalek or the Amalekites. Therefore, the archaeologist and historian Hugo Winkler suggested in 1895 that there were never any such people, and the biblical stories concerning them are entirely mythological and ahistorical. While considerable knowledge about nomadic Arabs has been recovered through archaeological research, no specific artifacts or sites have been linked to Amalek with any certainty. However, it is possible that some of the fortified settlements in the recovered the in the Negev highlands and even Tel Mesos near Beersheba have Amalek connections. Jewish traditions. According to a midrash, Amalek's mother Timnah was a princess who had tried to convert to Judaism but had been rejected by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She replied she would rather be a handmaiden to the dregs of this nation than be the mistress of another nation. To punish the patriarchs for the affront they had made her, she was made the mother of Amalek, whose descendants would cause Israel much distress. According to the Midrash, the Amalekites were sorcerers who could transform themselves to resemble animals in order to avoid capture. Thus, in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3, it was considered necessary to destroy the livestock in order to destroy Amalek. In Judaism, the Amalekites came to represent the archetypal enemy of the Jews. In Jewish folklore, the Amalekites are considered to be the symbol of evil. Ner Masala Elliot Horowitz and Joseph Stern suggest that Amalekites have come to represent an eternally irreconcilable enemy that wants to murder Jews, that Jews in post biblical times sometimes associate contemporary enemies with Haman or Amalekites, and that some Jews believe that preemptive violence is acceptable against such enemies. Groups identified with Amalek include the Romans, Nazis, Stalinists, ISIS, Palestinians, and bellicose Iranian leaders such as Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, whatever. More metaphorically, to some Hasidic rabbis, particularly the Baal Shem Tov, Amalek represents atheism of the rejection of God. During the Purim festival, the book of Esther is read in the commemoration of the saving of the Jewish people from Haman, who plotted to kill all Jews in Persian Empire. It is customary for the audience to make noise and shout whenever Haman is mentioned in order to desecrate his name, based on Exodus chapter 17, verse 14. It is also customary to recite Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 to 18 on the Shabbat before Purim. This was because Haman was considered to be an Amalekite, although this label is more likely to be symbolic rather than literal. Commandment to exterminate the Amalekites. In Judaism, 3 of the 613 mitzvot commandments involve Amalek, to remember what the Amalekites did to the Israelites, not to forget what the Amalekites did to Israelites, and to destroy the Amalekites utterly. The rabbis derived these from Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 to 18, Exodus chapter 17, verse 14, and 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3. Rashi explains the third commandment: from man unto woman, from infant unto suckling, from ox unto sheep, so that the name of Amalek not be mentioned even with reference to an animal by saying, this animal belonged to Amalek. As enumerated by Maimonides, the 3 mitzvot state. Remember what Amalek did to the Israelites. Wipe out the descendants of Amalek. Not to forget Amalek's atrocities and ambush on our journey from Egypt in the desert. Some commentators have discussed the ethical deficiency of the commandment to exterminate all the Amalekites, especially including the command to kill children and the presumption of collective punishment. It has also been described as genocidal, according to genocide scholars like Norman Naimark. Religious and modern scholarly discussion. The commandment to kill Amalekites is not practiced by contemporary Jews, based on the argument that Sennacherib deported and mixed the nations, so it is no longer possible to determine who is an Amalekite. Please. For example, Rabbi Chaim Palagai stated, we can only rely on the maxim that in ancient times Sennacherib confused the lineage of many nations. In addition, many rabbinic authorities ruled that the commandment only applies to a Jewish king or an organized community and cannot be performed by an individual. According to Haggahat Maimonides, the commandment applies only in the future messianic era and not in present times. This limitation is almost a consensus among medieval authorities. Maimonides explains that the commandment to destroy the nation of Amalek requires the Jewish people to peacefully request that they accept upon themselves the 7 laws of Noah and pay a tax to the Jewish kingdom. Only if they refuse must they be physically killed. In addition, the Amalekites as a physical nation have been extinct since the time of Hezekiah's reign, according to the Hebrew Bible. A few authorities have ruled that the command never included killing Amalekites. R. Samson Raphael Hirsch said that the command was to destroy the remembrance of Amalek rather than actual Amalekites. The Sfat Emet said that the command was to fully hate Amalek rather than performing any action. And the Shofetz Chaim said that God would perform the elimination of Amalek, and Jews are commanded only to remember what Amalek did to them. Theologian Charles Ellicott explains that the Amalekites were subject to Sherim in the book of Samuel for the purposes of incapacitation due to their accursed nature and the threat they posed to the commonwealth of surrounding nations. John Gill also describes the Sherim as an example of the law of retaliation being carried out. According to Christian Hofreiter, historically, almost all Christian authorities and theologians have interpreted the harem passages as referring to real historical events when God commanded the Israelites to exterminate all the members of particular nations. He states that there is practically no historical evidence that anyone in the Great Church viewed them as being purely an allegory. In particular, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and John Calvin have defended a literal reading of these passages at length. Origen of Alexandria is sometimes cited as having viewed the harem passages allegorically. Hofreiter argues that although Origen viewed a spiritual interpretation as having primary importance to Christians, he did not deny that the harem passages described historical events. Now, Basemath. Basmat, Basemat, sweet smelling, sweet smile in the Hebrew Bible is one of the wives of Esau. In Genesis chapter 26, verse 34 to 35, Basemath is the name of the first wife of Esau. She was the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Because Basemath was a Canaanite, Esau's marriage to Basemath, as well as to his second wife Judith, ignored God's wishes that Abraham's descendants keep themselves separate from the Canaanites in marriage. Esau's marriage to Basemath therefore brought bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. Esau is then said to have taken as his third wife a daughter of his uncle Ishmael, Mahalath. In Genesis chapter 36, verses 2 and 3, on the other hand, Esau's three wives are differently named. His family is mentioned as composed of two Canaanite wives, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, and a third, Bashemat, Ishmael's daughter. Some scholars equate the three wives mentioned in Genesis 26 and 28 with those in Genesis 36 the following way. Basemath or Basemath is Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Judith is Aholibamah, who is also a Canaanite. Mahalath is Bashemat, Esau's cousin and third wife, daughter of Ishmael. So Ada, the first wife, that name comes from the first wife of Lamech and the mother of Jabal and Jubal, Genesis chapter 4, 19 to 23. Also, the name of the first wife of Esau, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. It has been suggested by biblical scholars that she is the same person as Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, mentioned as a wife of Esau in Genesis 26. She bore Esau's firstborn Eliphaz and became the matriarch of the Edomites. Says that the Order of the Eastern Star considers Ada also to be the name of the daughter of Jephthah, although the Bible does not name her. So Aholibamah or Aholibamah, my tabernacle of is height, exaltation, or tent of the high place, is an 8-time referenced matriarch in the biblical record. Aholibamah, a descendant of Ishmael, was the daughter of Anah of Zibeon the Hivite. Her maternal grandfather was Zibeon the Hivite, son of Seir the Horite. She was one of 2 Canaanite women who married Esau, the son of Isaac, when he was in his 40s. Isaac and his wife Rebekah, however, were greatly opposed to this union. So, according to some biblical scholars, Esau changed her name to the Hebrew name Judith as to pacify his parents. Biblical scholars have thus conciliated the two different name accounts given in Genesis for the three wives, as I just stated. Basemath is Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Judith equals Aholibama, also a Canaanite. Mahalath is Bashemath, Esau's cousin and third wife, daughter of Ishmael. The name Aholibama appears again later among the listed clans of Edom, suggesting that a descendant of Esau had the same female name and became a chief. In popular culture, in the fantasy novel Many Waters by Madeline L'Engle, Aholibama was the daughter of a Nephil, fallen angel. She married into the family of Noah. Again, in the red tent, Aholibama is mentioned as having died in childbirth, leaving only Adath and Basemath, both bitter rivals for Esau's affections. So, Mahalath was, according to the Bible, the third wife of Esau, daughter of Ishmael and sister of Nebaioth. Esau took Mahalath from the house of Ishmael to be his wife after seeing that Canaanite wives, as was the case of his first two wives, Basemath and Judith, displeased his father Isaac. Esau sought this union with a non Canaanite in an effort to reconcile his relationship with his parents, namely with his father Isaac, whose blessing he sought. However, there is no record of his parents' approval for the union of Esau and Mahalath. She bore a son, Reuel, to Esau. So in Genesis 36, 2 and 3, on the other hand, Esau's three wives are differently named. His family is mentioned as composed of two Canaanite wives, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibama, and a third, Bashemath, Ishmael's daughter. Okay, so now we go into the veneration of the dead, which would be the religion of the Horites, which Esau married, the family that Esau married into. So the cult of the dead. The veneration of the dead, including one's ancestors, is based on love and respect for the deceased. In some cultures, it is related to beliefs that the dead have a continued existence and may possess the ability to influence the fortune of the living. Some groups venerate their direct familial ancestors. Certain sects and religions, in particular the Eastern Orthodox Church and Roman Catholic Church, venerate saints as intercessors with God. The latter also believes in prayer for departed souls in purgatory. Other religious groups, however, consider veneration of the dead to be idolatry and a sin. In European, Asian, Oceanian, African, and Afro-diasporic cultures, the goal of ancestor veneration is to ensure the ancestors' continued well-being and positive disposition towards the living, and sometimes to ask for special favors or assistance. The social or non religious function of ancestor veneration is to cultivate kinship values such as filial piety, family loyalty, and continuity of the family lineage. Ancestor veneration occurs in societies with every degree of social, political, and technological complexity, and it remains an important component of various religious practices in modern times. Ancestor reverence is not the same as the worship of a deity or deities. In some Afro diasporic cultures, ancestors are seen as being able to intercede on behalf of the living, often as messengers between humans and God. As spirits who were once human themselves, they are seen as being better able to understand human needs than would a divine being. In other cultures, the purpose of ancestor veneration is not to ask for favors, but to do one's filial duty. Some cultures believe that their ancestors actually need to be provided for by their descendants, and their practices include offerings of food and other provisions. Others do not believe that the ancestors are even aware of what their descendants do for them, but that the expression of filial piety is what is important. Most cultures who practice ancestor veneration do not call it ancestor worship. In English, the word worship usually but not always refers to the reverent love and devotion accorded a deity, god, or god. However, in other cultures, this act of worship does not confer any belief that the departed ancestors have become some kind of deity. Rather, the act is a way to express filial duty, devotion, and respect, and look after ancestors in their afterlives as well as seek their guidance for their living descendants. In this regard, many cultures and religions have similar practices. Some may visit the graves of their parents or other ancestors, leave flowers, and pray to them in order to honor and remember them, while also asking their ancestors to continue to look after them. However, this would not be considered as worshiping them since the term worship may not always convey such meaning in the exclusive and narrow context of certain Western European Christian traditions. In that sense, the phrase ancestor veneration may but from the limited perspective of certain Western European Christian traditions convey a more accurate sense of what practitioners such as the Chinese and other Buddhist influenced and Confucian influenced societies, as well as the African and European cultures, see themselves as doing. This is consistent with the meaning of the word veneration in English, that is, great respect or reverence caused by the dignity, wisdom, or dedication of a person. Although there is no generally accepted theory concerning the origins of ancestor veneration, this social phenomenon appears in some form in all human cultures documented so far. Uh, Dr. Barrett and Carney claim that ancestor veneration might have served a group coordination role during human evolution, and thus it was the mechanism that led to religious representation, fostering group cohesion. In West and Southeast African cultures, ancestor veneration is prevalent throughout Africa and serves as the basis of many religions. It is often augmented by a belief in a supreme being, but prayers and or sacrifices are usually offered to the ancestors who may ascend to becoming a kind of minor deities themselves. Ancestor veneration remains among many Africans, sometimes practiced alongside the later adopted religions of Christianity, as in Nigeria among the Igbo people, and Islam among the different Mande peoples and the Bamum and the Bakosi people in much of the continent. In Orthodox Serer religion, and Pangul is venerated by the Serer people. Serer of Senegal and Gambia. The Serer people of Senegal, the Gambia and Mauritania, who adhere to the tenets of a Fat Roog Serer religion, believe in the veneration of the Pangul, ancient Serer saints and or ancestral spirits. There are various types of Pangul, singular Fangol, each with its own means of veneration. Madagascar. Veneration of ancestors is prevalent throughout the island of Madagascar. Approximately half of the country's population of 20 billion currently practice traditional religion, which tends to emphasize links between the living and the Razana or ancestors. The veneration of ancestors has led to the widespread tradition of tomb building, as well as the Highlands practice of Fama Dehana, whereby a deceased family member's remains may be exhumed to be periodically rewrapped in fresh silk shrouds before being replaced in the tomb. The Fama Dehana is an occasion to celebrate the beloved ancestors' memory, reunite with family and community, and enjoy a festive atmosphere. Residents of surrounding villages are often invited to attend the party, where food and rum are typically served as a haragasi trope or other musical entertainment is commonly present. Veneration of ancestors is also demonstrated through adherence to fadi or taboos that are respected during and after the lifetime of the person who establishes them. It is widely believed that by showing respect for ancestors in these ways, they may intervene on behalf of the living. Conversely, misfortunes are often attributed to ancestors whose memory or wishes have been neglected. The sacrifice of zebu is a traditional method used to appease or honor the ancestors. Small, everyday gestures of respect include throwing the first capful of a newly opened bottle of rum into the northeast corner of the room to give the ancestors their due share. Asian cultures. Cambodia. During Shum Bin and the Cambodian New Year, people make offerings to their ancestors. Shum Bin is a time when many Cambodians pay their respects to deceased relatives of up to 7 generations. Monks chant the suttas in Pali language overnight, continuously without sleeping, in prelude to the gates of hell opening, an event that is presumed to occur once a year and is linked to the cosmology of King Yama originating in the Pali Canon. During this period, the gates of hell are opened and ghosts of the dead, Preta, are presumed to be especially active. In order to combat this, food offerings are made to benefit them, some of these ghosts having the opportunity to end their period of purgation, whereas others are imagined to leave hell temporarily to then return to endure more suffering. Without much explanation, relatives who are not in hell, who are in heaven or otherwise reincarnated, are also generally imagined to benefit from the ceremonies. In China, ancestor veneration, pinyin, jingzhu, and ancestor worship, baizu, seek to honor and recollect the actions of the deceased. They represent the ultimate homage to the dead. The importance of paying respect to parents and elders lies with the fact that all physical bodily aspects of one's being were created by one's parents, who continued to tend to one's well being until one was on firm footing. The respect and homage to parents is to return this gracious deed to them in life and after. The Shi corpse or personator was a Zhao dynasty 1045 through 256 BCE, a sacrificial representative of a dead relative. During a Shi ceremony or Shai, the ancestral spirit supposedly would enter the personator, who would eat and drink sacrificial offerings and convey spiritual messages. In traditional Chinese culture, sacrifices are sometimes made to altars as food for the deceased. This falls under the modes of communication with the Chinese spiritual world concepts. Some of the veneration includes visiting the deceased at their graves and making or buying offerings for the deceased in the spring, autumn, and ghost festivals. Due to the hardships of the late 19th and 20th century China, when meat and poultry were difficult to come by, sumptuous feasts are still offered in some Asian countries as a practice to the spirits or ancestors. However, in the Orthodox, Taoist, and Buddhist rituals, only vegetarian food would suffice. For those with deceased in the afterlife or hell, elaborate or even creative offerings such as servants, refrigerators, houses, car, paper money, and shoes are provided so that the deceased will be able to have these items after they have died. Often, paper versions of these objects are burned for the same purpose. Originally, real life objects were burned with the dead. In time, these goods were replaced by full size clay models which in turn were replaced by scale models and in time today's paper offerings, including paper servants. India. Ancestors are widely revered, honored, and venerated in India. The spirit of a dead person is called pitchers, which is venerated. When a person dies, the family observes a 13-day mourning period, generally called Shraddha. A year thence, they observe the ritual of Tarpan, in which the family makes offerings to the deceased. During these rituals, the family prepares the food items that the deceased liked and offers food to the deceased. They offer this food to crows as well on certain days, as it is believed that the soul comes in the form of a bird to taste. They are also obliged to offer Shraddha, a small feast of specific preparations, to eligible Brahmins. Only after these rituals are the family members allowed to eat. It is believed that this reminds the ancestors' spirits that they are not forgotten and are loved, so it brings them peace. On Shraddha days, people pray that the souls of ancestors be appeased, forget any animosity, and find peace. Each year, on the particular date, as per the Hindu calendar, when the person had died, the family members repeat this ritual. Indian and Chinese practices of ancestor worship are prevalent throughout Asia as a result of the large Indian and Chinese populations in countries such as Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and elsewhere across the continent. Furthermore, the large Indian population in places such as Fiji and Guyana has resulted in these practices spreading beyond their Asian homeland. Assam. The Ahom religion is based on ancestor worship. The Ahoms believe that a man after his death remains as Dam, ancestor, or Dam, Dam, only for a few days, and soon he becomes Phi, Phi, God. They also believe that the soul of a man, which is immortal, unites with the supreme soul, possesses the qualities of a spiritual being, and always blesses the family. So every Aham family, in order to worship the dead, establish a pillar on the opposite side of the kitchen, or bargar, which is called damkuta, where they worship the dead with various offerings like homemade wine, maprasad, rice with various items of meat and fish. Midam Mifi, a ritual centered on commemorating the dead, is celebrated by the Aham people on January 31st every year in memory of the departed. It is the manifestation of the concept of ancestor worship that the Ahams share with other peoples originating from the Tai Shan stock. It is a festival to show respect to the departed ancestors and remember their contribution to society. On the day of Medam Mephi, worship is offered only to Shaphi and Dam Shaphi because they are regarded as gods of heaven. Indus Valley Civilization. At Rakhigari, an Indus Valley Civilization or IVC site in Haryana, the lovers' skeletons of a man between 35 and 40 years old and women in early 20s were found who were likely married to each other and buried together. Their grave contained pots which likely carried food and water as offerings to the dead. Palaya in Gujarat. The Palaya memorial stones are associated with ancestral worship in Western India. These memorials are worshipped by people of associated community or descendants of a person on special days, such as death day of a person, event anniversaries, festivals, auspicious days in Kartika, Shravana, or Bhadrapada month of Hindu calendar. These memorials are washed with milk and water on these days. They are smeared with sindoor or kumkum, and flowers are scattered over it. The earthen lamp is lighted near it with sesame oil. Sometimes a flag is erected over it. Pitru Paksha, and Indian origin religions. Apart from this, there is also a fortnight-long duration each year called Pitru Paksha, Fortnight of Ancestors, when the family remembers all its ancestors and offers tarpan to them. This period falls just before the Navratri or Durga Puja, falling in the month of Ashwin. Mahalaya marks the end of the fortnight-long tarpan to the ancestors. Tuluva culture in Tulunada. Tuluvas have the ancestor worship in the name of Butu Kola. In Indonesia, ancestor worship has been a tradition of some of the indigenous people. Podom of the Toba Batak, Raruga of the Minahasans, and the coffins of the Karo people or Indonesia are a few examples of the forms the veneration takes. Japan. Before the introduction of Buddhism to Japan, ancestor worship and funerary rites were not common, especially for non-elites. In the Heian period, abandonment was a common method of disposing of the dead. Following the advent of Buddhism, rituals were sometimes performed at the gravesite after burial or cremation. In Korea, ancestor veneration is referred to by the generic term jere or jerye, hangul, hanja, or jesa, hanja. Notable examples of jerye included Munyo Jere and Jongmyo Jere, which are performed periodically each year for venerated Confucian scholars and kings of ancient times, respectively. The ceremony held on the anniversary of a family member's death is called Sharye. It is still practiced today. The majority of Catholics, Buddhists, and non believers practice ancestral rites, although Protestants do not. The Catholic ban on ancestral rituals was lifted in 1939 when the Catholic Church formally recognized ancestral rites as a civil practice. Ancestral rites are typically divided into three categories: Sharye, tea rites held 4 times a year on major holidays, Korean New Year, Chuseok; Kije, household rites held the night before an ancestor's death anniversary; and CJ, or seasonal rites held for ancestors who are 5 or more generations removed, typically performed annually on the 10th lunar month. Myanmar. Ancestor worship in modern day Myanmar is largely confined to some ethnic minority communities, but mainstream remnants of it still exist, such as worship of Bobo G, literally great grandfather, as well as of other guardian spirits such as Nats, all of which may be vestiges of historic ancestor worship. Ancestor worship was present in the royal court in pre colonial Burma. During the Konbong dynasty, solid gold images of deceased kings and their consorts were worshipped 3 times a year by the royal family. During the Burmese New Year, Thingyan, at the beginning and at the end of Vasa, the images were stored in the treasury and worshipped at the Zatawanzong Hall of Ancestors along with a book of odes. Some scholars attribute the disappearance of ancestor worship to the influence of Buddhist doctrines of anicca and anatta, impermanence and rejection of a self. The Philippines. In the animistic indigenous religions of the pre-colonial Philippines, ancestor spirits were one of the two major types of spirits, Anito, with whom shamans communicate. Ancestor spirits were known as Umalagad, or guardian or camp caretaker. They can be the spirits of actual ancestors or generalized guardian spirits of a family. Ancient Filipinos believed that upon death, the soul of a person travels, usually by boat, to a spirit world. There can be multiple locations in the spirit world, varying in different ethnic groups. Which place souls end up in depends on how they died, the age at death, or conduct of the person when they were alive. Souls reunite with deceased relatives in the underworld and lead normal lives in the underworld as they did in the material world. In some cases, the souls of evil people undergo penance and cleansing before they are granted entrance into a particular spirit realm. Souls would eventually reincarnate after a period of time in the spirit world. Souls in the spirit world still retain a degree of influence in the material world and vice versa. Paganito rituals may be used to invoke good ancestor spirits for protection, intercession, or advice. Vengeful spirits of the dead can manifest as apparitions or ghosts, mantu, and cause harm to living people. Paganito can be used to appease or banish them. Ancestor spirits also figured prominently during illness or death, as they were believed to be the ones who call the soul to the underworld, guide the soul, a psychopomp, or meet the soul upon arrival. Ancestor spirits are also known as Kalading or Kalading among the Cordillerans, Tanong among the Maguindano and Maranhão, Umbo among the Samabajo, Ninuno among Tagalogs, and Nono among Bicolanos. Ancestor spirits are usually represented by carved figures called Tau Tau. These were carved in the community upon a person's death. Every household had a Tau Tau stored in a shelf in the corner of the house. The predominantly Roman Catholic Filipino people still hold ancestors in particular esteem, though without the formality common to their neighbors, despite having been Christianized since coming into contact with Spanish missionaries in 1521. In the present day, ancestor veneration is expressed in having photographs of the dead by the home altar, a common fixture in many Filipino Christian homes. Candles are often kept burning before the photographs, which are sometimes decorated with garlands of fresh sambaguita, the national flower. Ancestors, particularly dead parents, are still regarded as psychopomps, as a dying person is said to be brought to the afterlife, Tagalog sundo, meaning fetch, by the spirits of dead relatives. It is said that when the dying call out the names of deceased loved ones, they can see the spirits of those particular people waiting at the foot of the deathbed. Filipino Catholic and Aglapayan veneration of the dead finds its greatest expression in the Philippines is the Halomas season between October 31st and November 2nd, variously called Undas based on the word for the first, the Spanish Andes or possibly Hanra. Todos los Santos, literally all saints, and sometimes Aronig Migapate, I'm messing up all these words, meaning Day of the Dead, which refers to the following solemnity of All Souls Day. Filipinos traditionally observe this day by visiting the family dead, cleaning and repairing their tombs. Common offerings are prayers, flowers, candles, and even food, while many also spend the remainder of the day and ensuing night holding reunions at the graveyard, playing games and music or singing. Chinese Filipinos, meanwhile, have the most apparent and distinct custom related to ancestor veneration, carried over from traditional Chinese religion and most often melded with their current Catholic faith. Many still burn incense and kim at family tombs and before photos at home, while they incorporate Chinese practices into masses held during the All Souls Day period. In Sri Lanka, making offerings to one's ancestors is conducted on the sixth day after death as a part of traditional Sri Lankan funeral rites. In rural northern Thailand, a religious ceremony honoring ancestral spirits known as Span Phai, literally spirit dance or ghost dance, takes place. It includes offerings for ancestors with spirit mediums sword fighting, spirit possessed dancing, and spirit mediums cockfighting in a spiritual cockfight. Ancestor veneration is one of the most unifying aspects of Vietnamese culture, as practically all Vietnamese have an ancestor altar in their home or business. In Vietnam, traditionally, people did not celebrate birthdays before Western influence, but the death anniversary of one's loved one was always an important occasion. Besides an essential gathering of family members for a banquet in memory of the deceased, incense sticks are burned along with hail notes, and great platters of food are made as offerings on the ancestor altar, which usually has pictures or plaques with the names of the deceased. In the case of missing persons believed to be dead by their family, a wind tomb is made. These offerings and practices are done frequently during important traditional or religious celebrations, the starting of a new business, or even when a family member needs guidance or counsel, and is a hallmark of the emphasis Vietnamese culture places on filial duty. A significant distinguishing feature of Vietnamese ancestor veneration is that women have traditionally been allowed to participate and co officiate ancestral rites, unlike the Chinese Confucian doctrine, which allows only male descendants to perform such rites. In European cultures, in Catholic countries in Europe, continued later with the Anglican Church in England, November 1st, All Saints' Day became known and is still known as the day to specifically venerate those who have died and who have been deemed official saints by the church. November 2nd, All Souls' Day, or the Day of the Dead, is the day when all of the faithful dead are remembered. On that day, families go to cemeteries to light candles for their dead relatives, leave them flowers, and often to picnic. The evening before All Saints, All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, is unofficially the Catholic day to remember the realities of hell, to mourn the souls lost to evil, and to remember ways to avoid hell. It is commonly celebrated in the United States and parts of the United Kingdom in a spirit of lighthearted horror and fear, which is marked by the recounting of ghost stories, bonfires, wearing costumes, carving jack o' lanterns, and trick or treating, going door to door, and begging for candy. Brythonic Celtic cultures. In Cornwall and Wales, the autumn ancestor festivals occur around November 1st. In Cornwall, the festival is known as Calan Gaeaf, and in Wales as Calan Gaeaf. Modern day Halloween is derived from these festivals. Gaelic Celtic cultures. During Samhain or Samhain, November 1st in Ireland and Scotland, the dead are thought to return to the world of the living, and offerings of food and light are left for them. On the festival day, ancient people would extinguish the hearth fires in their homes, participate in a community bonfire festival, and then carry a flame home from the communal fire and use it to light their home fires anew. This custom has continued to some extent into modern times in both the Celtic nations and the diaspora. Lights in the window to guide the dead home are left burning all night. On the Isle of Man, the festival is known as Od Samhain or Haptuna. In North America, in the United States and Canada, flowers, wreaths, grave decorations, and sometimes candles, food, small pebbles, or items the dead valued in life are put on graves year round as a way to honor the dead. These traditions originate in the diverse cultural backgrounds of the current populations of both countries. In the United States, many people honor deceased loved ones who were in the military on Memorial Day. Days with religious and spiritual significance like Easter, Christmas, Candlemas, and All Souls Day, Day of the Dead, or Samhain are also times when relatives and friends of the deceased may gather at the graves of their loved ones. In the Catholic Church, One's local parish church often offers prayers for the dead on their death anniversary or All Souls Day. In the United States, Memorial Day is a federal holiday for remembering the deceased men and women who served in the nation's military, particularly those who died in war or during active service. In the 147 national cemeteries like Arlington and Gettysburg, it is common for volunteers to place small American flags at each grave. Memorial Day is traditionally observed on the last Monday in May, allotting for a 3-day weekend in which many memorial services and parades take place not only across the country, but in 26 American cemeteries on foreign soil in France, Belgium, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, Panama, Italy, Luxembourg, Mexico, Netherlands, and Tunisia. It is also common practice among veterans to memorialize fallen service members on the dates of their death. This practice is also common in other countries when remembering Americans who died in battles to liberate their towns in the world wars. One example of this is on August 16, 1944, Colonel Griffith died of wounds from enemy action sustained in levees or leaves the same day he is credited with saving Chartres Cathedral from destruction. In Judaism, when a grave site is visited, a small pebble is placed on the headstone. While there is no clear answer as to why, this custom of leaving pebbles may date back to the biblical days when individuals were buried under piles of stones. Today, they are left as tokens that people have been there to visit and to remember. Americans of various religions and cultures may build a shrine in their home dedicated to loved ones who have died with pictures of their ancestors, flowers, and mementos. Increasingly, many roadside shrines may be seen for deceased relatives who died in car accidents or were killed on that spot, sometimes financed by the state or province, as these markers serve as potent reminders to drive cautiously in hazardous areas. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. is particularly known for the leaving of offerings to the deceased. Items left are collected by the National Park Service and archived. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints perform posthumous baptisms and other rituals for their dead ancestors, along with those of other families. Native Americans were not heavily concerned with the veneration of the dead, though they were known to bury the dead with clothes and tools, as well as occasionally leave food and drink at the gravesite. Pueblo Indians supported a cult of the dead, which worshiped or petitioned the dead through ritualistic dances. Islam has a complex and mixed view on the idea of grave shrines and ancestor worship. The graves of many early Islamic figures are holy sites for Muslims, including Ali, and a cemetery with many companions and early caliphs. Many other mausoleums are major architectural, political, and cultural sites, including the National Mausoleum in Pakistan and the Taj Mahal in India. However, the religious movement of Wahhabism, the religious movement of Wahhabism disputes the concept of saint veneration. Followers of this movement may have destroyed many gravesite shrines, including the Saudi Arabia and in territory controlled by the Islamic State. Iman Ahad al Hakim and others narrated about Marwan ibn al Hakam, an unjust ruler, that he once passed by the grave of the Prophet and saw a man with his cheek on the grave of the Prophet. Marwan ibn al Hakam asked, "Do you know what you are doing?" Nearing the grave, Marwan ibn al Hakam realized it was Abu Ayyub al Ansari, one of the greatest companions of the Prophet. And he replied, "Yes, I know what I am doing. I came here for the messenger of Allah, not for the stone." By this he meant he was seeking the blessings from the presence of the prophet, not for the stone covering his grave. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari continued his response with what he heard the messenger of Allah say. Do not cry over the religion of Islam if the rulers are ruling correctly. Rather, cry over this religion if the rulers are ruling incorrectly. By his response, Abu Ayyub was telling Marwan ibn al-Hakam, you are not one of those rulers who are correctly ruling by the rules of Islam. Some followers of Islam are at odds with the concept of saint veneration, but his practice is retained in Turkey, particularly through Alevi or Alevi Muslims. Ancient cultures. Ancestor worship was a prominent feature of many historical societies. Ancient Egypt. Although some historians claim that Egyptian society was a death cult because of its elaborate tombs and mummification rituals, it was the opposite. The philosophy that this world is but a vale of tears and that to die and be with God is a better existence than an earthly one was relatively unknown among the ancient Egyptians. This was not to say that they were unacquainted with the harshness of life. Rather, their ethos included a sense of continuity between this life and the next. The Egyptian people loved the culture, customs, and religion of their daily lives so much that they wanted to continue them in the next, although some might hope for a better station in the beautiful West Egyptian afterlife. Tombs were housing in the hereafter, and so they were carefully constructed and decorated, just as homes for the living were. Mummification was a way to preserve the corpse so the ka, or soul, of the deceased could return to receive offerings of the things she or he enjoyed while alive. If mummification was not affordable, a ka statue in the likeness of the deceased was carved for this purpose. The blessed dead were collectively called the Aku, or shining ones, singular Ak. They were described as shining as gold in the belly of Nut or Nuit, and were indeed depicted as golden stars on the roofs of many tombs and temples. The process by which a Ka became an Ak was not automatic upon death. It involved a 70-day journey through the Duat, or other world, which led to judgment before Weser, or Osiris, Lord of the dead, where the Ka's heart would be weighed on a scale against the feather of Mayat, representing truth. However, if the Ka was not properly prepared, this journey could be fraught with dangerous pitfalls and strange demons. Hence, some of the earliest religious texts discovered, such as the Papyrus of Anai, commonly known as the Book of the Dead, and the Pyramid text, were actually written as guides to help the deceased successfully navigate the Duat. If the heart was in balance with the feather of Mayat, the Ka passed judgment and was granted access to the beautiful West as an Ak who was Ma'aheru, true of voice, to dwell among the gods and other Aku. At this point only was the Ka deemed worthy to be venerated by the living through rites and offerings. Those who became lost in the Duat or deliberately tried to avoid judgment became the unfortunate and sometimes dangerous Mutu, the restless dead. For the few whose truly evil hearts outweighed the feather, the goddess Amit waited patiently behind Weser's judgment seat to consume them. She was a composite creature resembling three of the deadliest animals in Egypt: the crocodile, the hippopotamus, and the lion. Being fed to Amit was to be consigned to the eternal void, to be unmade as a ka. Besides being eaten by Amit, the worst fate a Ka could suffer after physical death was to be forgotten. For this reason, ancestor veneration in ancient Egypt was an important rite of remembrance in order to keep the Ka alive in this life as well as in the next. Royals, nobles, and the wealthy made contracts with their local priests to perform prayers and give offerings at their tombs. In return, the priests were allowed to keep a portion of the offerings as payment for services rendered. Some tomb inscriptions even invited passers-by to speak aloud the names of the deceased within, which also helped to perpetuate their memory and to offer water, prayers, or other things if they so desired. In the private homes of the less wealthy, niches were carved into the walls for the purpose of housing images of familial eku and to serve as altars of veneration. Many of these same religious beliefs and ancestor veneration practices are still carried on today in the religion of Kemetic Orthodoxy. The Romans, like many Mediterranean societies, regarded the bodies of the dead as polluting. During Rome's classical period, the body was most often cremated and the ashes placed in a tomb outside the city walls. Much of the month of February was devoted to purifications, propitiation, and veneration of the dead, especially at the 9 day festival of the Parentalia, during which a family honored its ancestors. The family visited the cemetery and shared cake and wine, both in the form of offerings to the dead and as a meal among themselves. The Parentalia drew to a close on February 21st with the more somber Feralia, a public festival of sacrifices and offerings to the manes, a potentially malevolent spirit of the dead who required propitiation. One of the most common inscriptional phrases on Latin epitaphs is dis manibus, abbreviated DM for the main gods, which appears even on some Christian tombstones. The Eucharistia on February 22nd was a celebration of the family line as it continued into the present. A noble Roman family displayed ancestral images or imagines in the tablinum of their home or domus. Some sources indicate these portraits were busts, while others suggest that funeral masks were also displayed. The masks, probably modeled of wax from the face of the deceased, were part of the funeral procession when an elite Roman died. Professional mourners wore the mask and regalia of the dead person's ancestors as the body was carried from the home through the streets and to its final resting place. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. We'll continue with the Valley of the Raphaim, which would be the Horites, going back to Esau and his family. Stay tuned. Thanks again for watching, tuning in. Love you guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Peace.